Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me right now on Keeping It Real, the Sunday edition. And as I've been talking about, mental health is a major issue in this country. Joining me now is Wendy Szczepanski, mental health therapist and counselor. I really appreciate you joining me because I want to highlight and help the country because mental health is a major issue.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you for having me, Dave. I really appreciate being here, but more importantly, thank you for advocating for mental health. I saw your interview with Sadie the other day on mental health, and I too feel that mental health is at the foundation of a lot of problems that we're facing. So it's refreshing to see someone in your position advocating for it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, before I get started, let me ask you because Sadie, for those of you who don't know, 21-year-old, I interviewed a couple days ago, and she talked about her struggles during COVID. And she put it as if mental illness, and other people have said it, it's literally like it's breaking your arm. Your arm needs to be fixed. Your
Mhm.
brain can also need fixing as well. And there should not be a stigma. And there, and
Absolutely.
it's getting better.
It
But is
is.
that correct? Mental illness is it's like any other, it's different.
Absolutely. It should be a paradigm shift in terms of, it being as normal as, a physical ailment, Like I say all the time to my clients, we get our oil change, we go to the doctor for our annual physicals, our dentist. Why do we not have preventative care for counseling? Why do we see it differently? Because again, it manifests in everything we do, right? Somatically, emotionally, physically. So yeah, I could not agree more. And I do think it is changing, but we still have, a ways to go yet.
I'd like to have you on every so often because I know you, and you're good. You're a great person, and maybe every month or so I'd like to have you on and talk about because there's not going to be a shortage of topics, obviously.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Today it seems like I want to talk about with. I talked to Sadie a couple days ago about COVID. Did that in the pandemic and the lockdown and so forth? Did that really heighten mental health issues, or did it just highlight it? I mean, or was it a combination of everything that just hit during the pandemic?
So I think it's a combination, but I think it's important to acknowledge that prior to COVID, we did see a surge in mental health issues, and surprisingly, at younger and younger ages. So it wasn't uncommon to have kids in the elementary ages come to therapy for anxiety. So it was no surprise that when COVID hit, these rates multiplied. And like any crisis, these issues tend to come to the surface, right? And I'll use your term, not to get too political, but there was strong, highly charged debate about the vaccination, right? And I personally witnessed families divided, friendships ending, and relational strains due to the dynamics that can lay dormant, right? So you got personality issues, you've got dynamics relationally, and these will surface, right? So think about even just mental health issues. So oftentimes the stressor, the crisis, in this case, COVID, is the vehicle by which these issues now become, part of the relational, dynamic. And so let's face it, COVID was stressful for everyone, right? So parents, right, having to navigate if they had to go to work, kids are at home, they're trying to, do the online schooling on their own, or oftentimes parents had to navigate childcare while they were working, and that's a recipe for anyone to go insane, right? So financial stress, it was very stressful for parents. Then you've got instructors having to navigate, a new learning system, and students. So let me talk for a moment about students. So I mean, I would not want to be a teenager in this world today, because it is very, very stressful. And I don't think parents can empathize the amount and the layers of stress that they're facing. But through COVID, right, they needed to be self-disciplined. And as you know, there's a lot of adults who can't even self-discipline in terms of like getting up. I mean, you've got the option of sleeping in versus getting on a computer all day long. I mean, let's face it, that's going to be difficult. We all benefit from schedules, but definitely kids benefit from schedules. So that was kind of off kilter. The lack of movement and exercise, I mean, that was imperative, but a lot of kids were at home in their beds, on their computers, lack of exercise, the social isolation, social media, which we'll talk about, and the impact of that,
Yeah.
um, and the academic stress. So most all of my clients took an academic hit on some level, whether it was a GPA drop, it was academic regression, or just anxiety. And so I think so many things kind of played into it. And again, if you've got other issues that you had before COVID, they're all coming to the surface with
Yeah.
all of these entities involved, and it's an interactive recipe for stress and mental health issues.
I I hope excuse me. I hope there are lessons to be learned. And I know even in the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know about the COVID because I remember my wife and myself actually, brushing off grocery bags and cleaning things. So we learned so much in the very beginning, and in the media. I'll admit the media made. I worked in the media, and I was fearful of the messaging that was coming down, and maybe there was a right to be fearful, possibly. But I don't think the media helped. Probably in the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like there was a lot of fear, and there reason to be fearful, yes, but I don't think there was a okay, let's just tell us what we need to know, and lay it out there calmly, and don't go to the extremes. I don't know, that was me working in a newsroom. I felt as if sometimes they were hyping up the worst case, and that just made it even more stressful.
Sure, absolutely.
So are there lessons to be learned, hopefully in your lifetime and my lifetime? We never have to go through another pandemic, but there will be another one. So
Mhm.
hopefully people can go back and look at what happened. What would you, I don't want to say if you were the president of the United States, but if you could go back and change things, or tell people, like Sadie I talked to said she wishes she could have been more regimented at home and had more
Mhm.
of a schedule. What advice would you have if we went through another one, or what lessons can be learned from what we just went through?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge. I mean, we all make mistakes, right? I mean, you, me, our kids, our bosses, our schools, our government. We all make mistakes, and I think what matters is what we do with those mistakes. Do we grow from it, or do we repeat it and allow it to, manifest into other problems? And so it's important to ask the hard questions. What went well, what did not, and if it didn't go well, like why and why not? What do we need to change? And it's imperative that we have these discussions, right? That we're accountable, on no matter who it is, we're accountable to this was not helpful. And we have these discussions, and we identify a plan, we implement that, we evaluate it, and we reevaluate it, right? So whether, like, for example, the schools, how did we handle that, what went well? A lot of times people talk about it, and they can talk all day about what didn't go well, but do they actually change what they're doing, put it into place, and then evaluate it, right? I think, and I know that seems like common sense, but it truly is imperative, because there's when we have issues, it's easy to, you know it's uncomfortable to have to deal with them, to make the hard choices, to confront people, to do that. And so from a parental standpoint, in terms of, like, what do we learn from this? So I think it's important, like, moving forward in terms of helping your kids. And I think that was part of the focus today is, um, that we need to be aware of mental health issues, right? You need to be aware of what they are. You can't identify them, and you can't help your kids if you're not aware of them. But you
Yeah.
also need to be aware of the social media dangers and pitfalls. Not too long ago, I was made aware of, um, people were luring teens into, sending inappropriate material, and then they would blackmail them for fear of exposure. And some of these cases resulted in suicides. And so it's important that you're aware of the dangers and the pitfalls of the social media, and they're everywhere. There's so many of them, and it's a full-time job keeping track of it. But furthermore, like, communicating with your kids, being able to say, no matter what, like, no matter what, we'll deal with whatever. Like, I am here to help you. Please, like, don't be ashamed, or talk to me about what you're feeling, or have that line of communication, and help kids understand, like, that, you know, there are options. And understand too, this is important for parents to know, that just because you have those conversations and you know, dot your I's and cross your T's, doesn't mean your kids are going to come to you, right? More than likely, they're not going to talk to mom and dad, even though they know they can and they've had those discussions. So you have to make sure that you offer them resources. You give them ample resources to talk to, like 1-800-SUICIDE, teachers, mentors, trusted adults. 988 is that new, it's like a 1-800, it's a 24-hour, 7-day week. It kind of piggyback off of 1-800-SUICIDE, but it's a 24/7, you know, hotline that you can talk to. Also, encourage counseling. I'm a big advocate on prevention versus management. A lot of times people come to counseling when issues are so severe, and it's like we need to back that up. If you have a history of depression or anxiety in your family, have those discussions early, talk about it, normalize it, so that they can articulate it and they can identify, like, oh gee, this is what I'm experiencing. And then counseling won't be so taboo when they actually have some, you know, debilitating symptoms. So encourage the counseling, get them in, don't wait until it's severe. And also I would encourage parents to seek counseling. I mean, I'm biased. I think everyone should benefit. It can benefit from mental health. Life's hard, right?
Oh
Relationships
yeah.
are tough. No one teaches us how to navigate through that. And so having a professional to be able to say, this is how you can help, maybe this is how you're contributing to the problem, you know, this is what to look for, giving the tools to help, you know, the child is extremely important. And I think from an academic standpoint, I think we have significant room to grow in terms of, you know, identifying students in need who are struggling, and connecting them to the resources that they need. I actually worked as a school counselor in a district for several years, and I can say that school counselors are not equipped to handle the traditional therapeutic needs of students for many reasons. The sheer volume of students that they have to, you know, serve. They're responsible for the academic guidance and career planning and all of those things. So they don't have it in their time and schedule to be able to give it. It'd be no different than like pastors, right? Pastoral counseling. Like, they can't do pastoral counseling week in and week out with their you know, congregation. So it's a matter of giving the support and connecting them to the people that can help. And so I do think that we can grow in that way, where teachers are, you know, I led a peer helper program. It's similar to the peer-to-peer here in town, but it was more of a mental health focus. And so I trained students on how to identify kids who are at risk, and then help them to connect them either, you know, to me, and then I would be that, you know, collaboration for the resources they need, or encourage counseling. So I do think that we can grow in that way, but there is help out there. There is a lot of help out there, and I know I'm just kind of rambling, so
Oh
I hope.
no, but the one thing you just said, going before things get bad. And I'll admit, I have a therapist that I go to, and when I lived in Pittsburgh, I started going to her, and I will go every once in a while. Well, telehealth, I will do it over the computer, just to check in every once in a while, because I feel so much better. And with me and with many people, probably they let it bubble up and get to a head. But I've realized with a therapist, a counselor, I do a check-in. But when I was younger, though, I'm 48 years old now. My dad, my mom, if you went to a therapist, there was it was a negative, and it wasn't something that was done. And before my mom passed away, she's like, she wishes at a younger age we would have been more involved in therapy. So that's why I'm doing a lot of this, because I think people need to realize, yeah, don't just wait until something tragic happens. Start it at a young age, because I feel it's so refreshing to just clear your mind and get you on a good track.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, it's no different than, like I said, getting your annual physical, right? Are things working? How, you know, if not, what do we need to attend to? And I personally think in terms of marriages, like, I wish that was, you know, that was required, that because it's tough. Nobody teaches how to navigate through the normal stressors of life, right? The normal stressors which, I mean, we all face, right? Loss, despair, I mean, for students, I'll use the term loosely, bullying, all of those things that we need help. Nobody teaches us. And for marriages, it's how are we doing? Like, and, and, and it's just like I said, from a preventative standpoint, going in and just having a professional, objective person say, this is where you guys are strong, but I see some concern here, and might you consider this, or let's talk about how to handle that in a healthy way. So mental health overall, marriage, and that helps with the family, right? Because as we all know, divorce, blended, single parents is very difficult. So when we talk about COVID, all of these issues that we normally have to deal with, that kids have to deal with, like sports, academic pressure, family issues, friendships, cyberbullying. I mean, there's so many. Those are normal stressors, right? And then if they're not equipped to be able to handle that, they don't know how to handle it, then it catapults into debilitating issues.
Like I said, I'm going to have you on quite a bit. I'm touched a little bit on social media now. I think I'm going to have a whole entire show on social media because there is so much to unravel with that. But if someone's watching right now, because what is the best advice to parents? Because I have two, a 6 and a 10-year-old, and they're not on social media, but some younger people are. And we're going to talk about a whole other show. I'll go into it, but just real quick, some advice for parents when it comes to social media safety. Should parents? I think I know the answer to this. You should be involved 100% if they're on social media, what the children are doing.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many negative implications for social media, but it's also a catch-22, Dave, because as they get older, if they're not on these, what everyone else is doing, then they feel this alienation,
Yep.
right? And kids are smart. They get ahead of us. And so they're, okay, well, if you're going to monitor on this one, then I'm going to do this one. So it's complex. It's very difficult. Absolutely. We need to be involved and aware and try to monitor. And I do believe that social media and cell phone addiction is going to be a huge contender to the number one addiction in this world, and not just for kids, for everybody.
Definitely. Yeah. Adults. I mean, my job, when I was at the station, I was a digital manager. So my job is tied to that addiction, which is bad. We're going to get into that in another show, maybe in a couple weeks or a month. But the last question I want to ask, and you brought it up before we went live here, talking about the access to mental health. I've met many people who have not been able to get access to mental health, but you brought up something very important, that there is telehealth. I do it myself. I have a therapist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I didn't even think of that. But what options for people who are watching right now, and I know you're pretty booked up, but what options do people have for mental health? They shouldn't just limit themselves to if there's no therapist available at that given time.
Absolutely. I think the accessibility to treatment is so much more promising and available than it ever has been. And most insurance plans now cover it, and sometimes unlimited session, provided that you can therapeutically support that. But if you can't afford the insurance, I mean, Medicaid, if you meet the qualifications for that, covers it at typically at 100%. So that's no cost. Medicare now, it covers it for social workers. We're in the process of having it covered for LPCs. But if it's a secondary insurance, then it will pick it up. But insurance covers it. And now, because of COVID, I mean, that's the one benefit of COVID, is they allowed us to do telehealth. And most insurance companies are still covering that. I pray that does not change. There is a chance that could change, but you're not limited geographically. So if you're calling, I'm having people call all the time, and they're like, well, if you're booked, who can you recommend? And I, there's very few people in this area that are taking new clients, because a lot of people do have a wait list. But you're not limited. You're not limited. And on top of that, I encourage people to go to the people that specialize in what they're struggling with. So now, where it's not just, oh, this counselor's open, I can go there. You can do a thorough search, and I encourage you to do your research so that you can find exactly what you're looking for. Someone who's qualified, trained, experienced in what it is that you're dealing with.
Gotcha. And it sounds like the most important thing I'm taking from today is talk about it, put it in the open. Don't even if you're a young person, an older person, whoever it is, make mental health part of the discussion. If we can get one thing from our talk today, it sounds like make it part of the discussion, because the more we talk about it, the more it's going to help, and put it out there and make it just part of health, not even mental health, just good health, right? That's what we
Absolutely.
need to do.
And for everyone, not just our kids, for
Yes.
ourselves, that we
Yes.
all take accountability, because we all need it, in order to stay healthy. If you don't, you're going to pay for it on the back end. And that's what I tell people, because some people say, I will say, in terms of affordability, the middle class is probably the where you have to pay for it, because oftentimes with like some insurance plans, you have to meet a deductible, and it can be pretty hefty, and so they're paying out of pocket. And I'll hear people say, well, I can't afford it, and I'll say, well, you kind of can't. You can't not afford it, because you're going to pay for it one way or another. Divorce is expensive, medications are expensive, and so you just have to reprioritize it.
Well, I appreciate you joining us on this Sunday. Like I said, I'd like to have you back, because the wealth of
Thank you, Dave.
knowledge there, I think you're able to help people who are watching, and help them, but also lend them to go get support themselves. But I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you, Dave. And I thank you again for advocating for mental health. We need more people doing it. So thank you. And thanks for having me.